When HOA President Margaret blocked my wheelchair-bound daughter from attending an animal auction, she thought she'd won. What she didn't know. I owned the entire event. Her cruelty was about to backfire in the most spectacular way possible, transforming our neighborhood forever and teaching her a lesson she'd never forget. Before watching full story, comment below from where you watching. Also like and subscribe for more stories. The morning sun cast long shadows across our quiet neighborhood as I watched my 12-year-old daughter Emily stare out the window with tears in her eyes. In her small hands she clutched a colorful flyer advertising the county's annual animal auction. The same flyer she had been looking at every day for the past month, dreaming of the horses, goats and rabbits she might see there. "Daddy, do you really think we can go this weekend?" Emily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The hope in her green eyes made my heart ache with both love and pain. "Of course, sweetheart," I said, kneeling beside her wheelchair and taking her hand. "We'll make it the best day ever." For a moment, Emily's face lit up with the brightest smile I had seen in 2 long years. 2 years since the accident that changed everything. 2 years since a drunk driver ran a red light and crushed our car, shattering my little girl's spine and taking away her ability to walk. The doctor said she would never walk again, but what broke my heart more than her physical injuries was watching my once adventurous daughter retreat into herself, afraid to dream, afraid to hope for anything good. My name is Michael Torres and I built my agricultural supply company from nothing, working 18-hour days to create a better life for my family. But all the money in the world couldn't fix what happened to Emily. What it could do, however, was give her moments of pure joy. And if an animal auction could bring back her beautiful smile, I would move heaven and earth to make it happen. What I didn't know was that our neighbor, Margaret Whitman, had very different plans. Margaret was the self-appointed queen of Willowbrook Estates, our upscale neighborhood where every lawn was perfectly trimmed and every house painted in approved colors. As the HOA president, she ruled with an iron fist, measuring grass heights with an actual ruler and sending violation notices for the smallest infractions. She was a woman in her early 50s with perfectly styled blonde hair, expensive designer clothes, and a permanent scowl that suggested the world had personally wronged her in some unforgivable way. From the day we moved into our beautiful home 3 years ago, Margaret had made it crystal clear that she didn't approve of our family. Maybe it was because I was a successful Hispanic businessman who had earned his place in their exclusive neighborhood, or maybe she simply enjoyed making other people miserable. After Emily's accident, Margaret's cruel attitude had only gotten worse. She complained about the wheelchair ramp we installed, calling it an unsightly eyesore that was bringing down everyone's property values. She even had the nerve to suggest that we consider moving somewhere more appropriate for our unfortunate situation. Every cruel word felt like a knife in my heart, but I stayed calm for Emily's sake. My daughter had been through enough pain without seeing her father lose his temper at the neighborhood bully. On Friday morning, as I was carefully loading Emily's wheelchair into our specially modified van, Margaret appeared at her front door like a vulture sensing fresh prey. She walked across her perfectly manicured lawn with that fake smile that never reached her cold blue eyes. "Good morning, Mr. Torres," she called out, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "I couldn't help but notice you're preparing for another one of your little outings." "Good morning, Margaret," I replied, trying to keep my voice neutral and calm. Emily was sitting in the van listening to everything, and I didn't want her to hear any unpleasantness. "I do hope you're not planning to attend that dreadful animal auction tomorrow," Margaret continued, stepping closer with her arms crossed. "The noise, the crowds, the completely unsanitary conditions. Surely that's no place for a child in Emily's delicate condition." My hands tightened on the wheelchair handles as anger flashed through me like lightning. "Emily's condition doesn't limit where she can go or what she can enjoy, Margaret." Margaret's smile became even more razor-sharp and cruel. "Of course not, I'm simply concerned about the practical aspects of such an outing. The parking situation alone would be extremely challenging for someone who requires such special accommodations. And I've heard the terrain there is quite rough and uneven. I would absolutely hate for there to be any unfortunate incidents." Before I could respond with the words that were burning in my throat, Emily's sweet voice came from inside the van. "Daddy? Is everything okay out there?" "Everything's perfectly fine, sweetheart," I called back, forcing cheerfulness into my voice, then turned back to Margaret with fire in my eyes. "We'll manage just fine, thank you so much for your concern." But Margaret wasn't finished with her cruelty yet. That evening, as Emily and I were sitting at the kitchen table excitedly planning our trip to the auction, there was a sharp knock at our front door. I opened it to find Margaret standing there with a smug expression, holding an official-looking document in her manicured hands. "I'm so sorry to bother you this evening," she said, though her expression suggested she was anything but sorry, "but I've received several very serious complaints from concerned neighbors about the planned disruption tomorrow." "What disruption?" I asked, though I had a terrible sinking feeling I knew exactly where this conversation was heading. "The animal auction, of course," Margaret replied with fake sympathy. "Apparently there are numerous concerns about the increased traffic, serious parking issues, and excessive noise levels that would result from residents attending such an event. As HOA president, I have a solemn duty to protect the peace, tranquility, and property values of our beautiful community." She handed me the document with a triumphant smile. It was a legal injunction signed by a local judge, prohibiting any non-residential commercial activities, or excessive vehicular traffic related to commercial events, within a 5-mile radius of our neighborhood. The timing was suspiciously convenient, and I could smell Margaret's manipulation all over it. "This is absolutely ridiculous," I said, scanning the complex legal language. "The auction isn't even taking place in our neighborhood." "Ah, but the parking overflow and traffic congestion certainly would affect us," Margaret replied with obvious smugness. "And with all those vehicles coming and going at all hours, it would definitely have a negative impact on our peaceful residential community. I'm sure a businessman like yourself can understand the importance of protecting property values." Behind me, I heard the soft sound of Emily's wheelchair approaching down the hallway. My heart began to break as I realized what I would have to tell her. "Daddy? What's wrong?" Emily asked, appearing beside me. Her hopeful expression made me want to punch a hole through the wall. I turned to look at my daughter's innocent face, and my heart completely shattered into a million pieces. How could I possibly explain that a grown woman was so incredibly cruel that she would destroy a disabled child's simple dream just to flex her petty power? "It's nothing important, sweetheart," I said, forcing the biggest fake smile of my life. "Just some boring grown-up paperwork." But Emily had gotten very good at reading people's faces since the accident. She had learned to notice every small detail, every hidden emotion. Her bright green eyes filled with tears as she looked from me to Margaret and back again. "We can't go tomorrow, can we?" she whispered, her voice breaking my heart into even smaller pieces. Margaret actually had the audacity to put on a sympathetic expression. "I'm so sorry, dear, but sometimes grown-ups have to make very difficult decisions for the good of everyone in the community." I wanted to explode with rage. I wanted to tell Margaret exactly what I thought of her and her ridiculous power trip. I wanted to expose her cruelty to the whole world. But Emily was watching with tears streaming down her face, and she had already been through far too much pain in her young life. "We'll figure something out, sweetheart," I promised Emily, though I had absolutely no idea what that could possibly be. That night, Emily cried herself to sleep for the first time since the weeks immediately after her accident. I sat in my home office until dawn, staring at Margaret's injunction and feeling more helpless and furious than I had felt since the day of the crash. All my business success, all my financial resources, all my connections, and I couldn't protect my own daughter from one bitter woman's heartless cruelty. But then, as the sun began to rise, an idea started to form in my mind. A plan that would not only give Emily the most amazing auction experience of her life, but would also teach Margaret Whitman a lesson she would never, ever forget. I spent the entire night and the next morning making dozens of phone calls. By noon, I had a plan that would change everything. You see, what Margaret didn't know was that I hadn't just been successful in any business. I had been successful in exactly the right business. My company, Torres Agricultural Solutions, was one of the largest livestock and agricultural equipment suppliers in the entire state. I had personal relationships with every major ranch, farm, and animal auction house within 200 miles, including the county animal auction that Emily desperately wanted to attend. More specifically, I was the primary sponsor, organizer, and financial backer of the entire event. What had started 5 years ago as a simple business venture had become deeply personal when I realized how much pure joy and happiness it brought to families just like ours. Margaret's spiteful injunction might prevent the auction from happening at its original location, but it couldn't prevent me from bringing the entire auction directly to Emily. Saturday morning arrived gray and drizzling, with heavy clouds that matched my daughter's mood perfectly. Emily sat by her bedroom window in her wheelchair, still clutching that crumpled auction flyer. She hadn't said much since learning we couldn't go, and the sight of her defeated posture made my resolve stronger than steel. "Emily," I said, entering her room with a mysterious smile, "I need you to get dressed in your favorite outfit." She looked at me with confusion and sadness. "Why, Daddy? We can't go anywhere, remember? Mrs. Whitman made sure of that." "Trust me, sweetheart, I said, my smile growing wider. Sometimes when you can't go to the mountain, you bring the mountain to you. An hour later, the first massive livestock trailer rumbled onto our quiet suburban street. Margaret was in her front yard, probably preparing to document any violations she could report to whatever authority would listen, when the enormous truck pulled up and parked directly across from her house. Then came another truck. And another. And another. By 10 a.m., our peaceful residential street had been completely transformed into the most amazing agricultural fair anyone had ever seen. The large empty lot next to our house, which I had quietly purchased 6 months earlier through a shell company for exactly this type of situation, was now filled with professional-grade portable pens, auction rings, sound systems, and dozens of the most beautiful animals you could imagine. Margaret stood frozen on her perfectly manicured lawn like a statue, watching in absolute horror as horses, goats, sheep, pigs, chickens, rabbits, and even a few miniature donkeys were carefully unloaded practically in her backyard. Professional auctioneers in cowboy hats set up their equipment, licensed veterinarians established animal check-in stations, and families from all over the county began arriving with excitement and anticipation. But the most wonderful part was watching Emily's face when she finally realized what was happening. "Daddy?" she whispered from her wheelchair at our front window, her voice filled with awe and disbelief. "Is this really your very own personal animal auction, sweetheart?" I said, kneeling beside her with tears of joy in my eyes. "Every single animal, every person, every event, it's all here just for you." Tears streamed down Emily's face, but for the first time in 2 years, they were tears of pure, overwhelming happiness and joy. The first annual Willowbrook Estates Animal Auction and Family Fair was everything Emily had dreamed of and so much more. I had arranged for wheelchair-accessible platforms throughout the entire venue, specialized transportation so Emily could safely interact with all the animals, and a dedicated team of volunteers whose only job was to make sure my daughter had the most amazing day of her entire life. Margaret, meanwhile, was having what was undoubtedly the worst day of hers. She stormed over to our property line around noon, her face bright red with fury and embarrassment. "This is completely outrageous," she shrieked over the cheerful sounds of children laughing, animals making their happy noises, and families enjoying themselves. "This is supposed to be a quiet residential neighborhood. You can't just turn it into a barnyard circus." I was standing near the main auction ring, where Emily was getting ready to bid on a gentle brown and white goat named Daisy that had immediately stolen her heart. "Actually, Margaret, I absolutely can," I said with perfect calmness. "This entire event is taking place on my private property, which I purchased legally and which has been properly zoned for agricultural activities." "That's completely impossible." Margaret sputtered with rage. "This is a residential zone. There are rules. There are regulations." I pulled out a thick folder of official documents and permits. "Not anymore, Margaret. I had the zoning legally changed 6 months ago through the proper channels. Everything was filed correctly with the county, all permits were obtained, all safety regulations are being followed to the letter. Unlike certain injunctions that were filed without proper legal cause or jurisdiction." Margaret's face went from bright red to deep purple. "I'm calling the police right now. I'm calling the county authorities. I'm going to shut this whole thing down." "Please feel free to try," I said calmly, gesturing toward the uniformed police officers who were directing traffic and clearly enjoying the festivities with their own families. "Officer Martinez over there is actually here with his wife and 3 children. His youngest daughter is hoping to win the rabbit auction later this afternoon." As if perfectly timed by fate, Emily's clear, strong voice rang out over the professional loudspeaker system. The auctioneers had given her the special honor of announcing each auction lot. "Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls," Emily's confident voice carried across the entire crowd, "next up for auction is Daisy, a beautiful 2-year-old Nubian goat who absolutely loves eating apples and getting her ears scratched behind the fence." The crowd erupted in cheers and applause, and I watched my daughter's face absolutely glow with happiness, pride, and pure joy. She was the center of attention in the most wonderful way possible, surrounded by people who saw her for who she truly was, a smart, brave, incredible young lady who happened to use a wheelchair. Margaret watched in growing despair and panic as more and more of our neighbors enthusiastically joined the festivities. The Johnsons brought their twin toddlers to pet the gentle ponies. The elderly Garcia couple set up comfortable lawn chairs to watch the auction with huge smiles. Even the Petersons, who Margaret had always considered her closest allies in the HOA, were laughing and taking pictures with their visiting grandchildren. But I wasn't nearly finished with Margaret yet. Around 2 p.m., as the main auction was reaching its exciting peak, I walked up to the microphone. The crowd of several hundred people gradually quieted as I prepared to speak. Ladies and gentlemen, families and friends, I began, my voice carrying clearly across the venue. I want to thank each and every one of you for coming to our very first Willowbrook Estates Animal Auction and Family Fair. This incredible event was organized for one very special reason: to bring joy and happiness to a very special young lady who has shown more courage, strength, and grace in the face of tremendous adversity than most adults will ever show in their entire lifetimes. I gestured toward Emily, who was beaming with pride from her special platform near the auction ring. The crowd erupted in thunderous applause and cheers. But I also want to address something very important with all of you, I continued, my voice growing more serious and intense. This amazing event almost didn't happen because one person tried to use legal manipulation and community pressure to prevent a disabled child from attending a simple animal auction. A worried murmur ran through the crowd like wildfire. Margaret, who had been standing at the very edge of the property line, began backing nervously toward her house. "You see," I said, pulling out a copy of Margaret's injunction and holding it high for everyone to see, "yesterday evening our HOA president, Margaret Whitman, presented me with this legal document, claiming that my daughter's attendance at the county animal auction would somehow cause harm to our peaceful community." The murmur grew much louder, and I could see people throughout the crowd turning to look at Margaret with expressions of shock, disgust, and complete disbelief. "Now, I want to be absolutely clear about something," I continued with growing intensity. "Mrs. Whitman has every legal right to her personal opinions, and every right to file whatever legal documents she chooses. But what she didn't realize is that actions always have consequences, especially when those actions deliberately target innocent children who have already suffered enough." I paused dramatically, letting the full weight of my words settle over the now completely silent crowd. Mrs. Whitman's injunction did indeed prevent the original county auction from taking place at its scheduled location. But what she didn't know, what she couldn't have possibly known, is that I am the primary organizer, sponsor, and financial backer of that very same auction. The crowd began to stir with excitement and anticipation. So instead of simply canceling the event and disappointing hundreds of families, I decided to bring the entire auction here, to our own neighborhood, where it can be enjoyed by our entire community and where my daughter can have the experience she has been dreaming about for months. The crowd began to cheer and applaud enthusiastically, but I held up my hand for complete silence. However, there is one more very important thing that Mrs. Whitman didn't know when she made her cruel decision. I smiled, but it wasn't a kind or friendly smile. As the primary organizer of this event, I have the complete authority to determine who is and who is not welcome to participate in any way. I turned to look directly at Margaret, who was now standing frozen in her front doorway with her face completely pale. "Mrs. Margaret Whitman, you are hereby permanently banned from participating in this auction or any future events organized by my company or any of our partner organizations. You are not welcome to bid on any animals, participate in any activities, purchase any food or merchandise, or even set foot on these auction grounds." The crowd fell into stunned silence and I could feel the electric tension in the air. "Furthermore," I continued with growing intensity, "I will be sharing the complete story of your deliberate attempt to prevent a disabled child from attending this auction with the local media, the county commissioners, the state agricultural board, and anyone else who might be interested in understanding exactly what kind of person has been leading our HOA." Margaret's mouth opened and closed like a fish desperately gasping for air, but no sound came out at all. "But most importantly," I said, my voice growing gentle and warm as I turned back to Emily, "none of Margaret's cruelty matters at all, because today is about celebrating the most incredible young woman who inspired this entire event. Emily, would you like to tell everyone about your new best friend Daisy?" Emily took the microphone with trembling hands, tears of pure joy streaming down her beautiful face. "Daisy is going to be my very best friend in the whole world," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the suddenly quiet crowd. "And even though I can't run and play with her the way other kids might, I can still love her with my whole heart and take care of her and show her that being different doesn't mean being worth any less." The crowd absolutely erupted. People were cheering, crying, and applauding all at the same time. I saw grown men wiping tears from their eyes and mothers hugging their children a little bit tighter. Emily had won her goat and so much more. She had won back her confidence, her joy, and her belief that the world could still be a beautiful place. As the afternoon continued, the auction raised over $75,000 for local animal shelters, agricultural education programs, and disability advocacy organizations. Emily was interviewed by 4 different television news stations, all of whom were eager to hear about the brave young girl who had inspired an entire community to come together in such a powerful way. Margaret, meanwhile, had retreated into her house and hadn't been seen since my public speech. Her perfectly maintained lawn was now bordered by temporary animal pens filled with happy goats and sheep, and the joyful sound of children's laughter filled what had once been her domain of enforced silence and rigid control. But the real magic happened as the sun began to set behind the trees. Emily was sitting in her wheelchair next to Daisy's pen, feeding her new best friend apple slices and talking to her in the soft, gentle voice she used when she was truly happy. I stood nearby, watching my daughter's face glow with pure contentment and joy. "Daddy?" Emily said, looking up at me with those bright green eyes that sparkled with renewed hope. "Thank you for never giving up on me even when I wanted to give up on myself." "Sweetheart," I said, kneeling beside her wheelchair and taking her small hand in mine, "I will never ever give up on you, not as long as there is breath in my body. You are the strongest, bravest, most wonderful person I have ever known in my entire life. Even though I'm different from other kids now?" "You were always different from other kids," I said, gently brushing a happy tear from her cheek. "You were always special, always extraordinary. The accident didn't change that fundamental truth about who you are. It just made the rest of the world finally see what I've always known." As we prepared to head home that evening, neighbors I had barely spoken to in 3 years came up to thank us for organizing such an incredible event. Children who had never paid any attention to Emily before were asking when they could come visit Daisy and whether Emily might teach them about taking care of animals. The entire social dynamic of our community had shifted dramatically in just a single day. The next morning, Margaret's for sale sign appeared on her front lawn like a white flag of surrender. 2 weeks later, she was completely gone from our lives. The house sold quickly to the most wonderful family, the Hendersons, who had 3 children including a 10-year-old son named Jake with autism who absolutely adored animals of all kinds. When they heard Emily's story and met Daisy, they asked if Jake could visit sometime to learn about goat care. Emily was absolutely thrilled to have a new friend who understood what it was like to be different from other kids. 6 months later, the Willowbrook Estates animal auction had become a beloved annual tradition that drew families from across 3 counties. Emily served as the honorary chairperson and youth spokesperson, and her inspiring story led to the creation of a nonprofit foundation that provided therapy animals to children with various disabilities. Margaret never returned to our neighborhood, but I heard through mutual business acquaintances that she had moved to a 55-plus retirement community in Arizona where she had immediately begun campaigning to become the new HOA president there. Some people truly never learn from their mistakes. But Emily learned something far more valuable and important that day. She learned that being different doesn't mean being less valuable, that communities can be built on kindness and acceptance instead of judgment and exclusion, and that sometimes the people who try their hardest to tear you down end up accidentally building you up instead. 1 year after the auction, Emily started a blog called Rolling with Grace and Courage, where she wrote honestly about her experiences as a young person with a disability. Her thoughtful posts about self-acceptance, dealing with bullies and cruel people, finding unexpected joy in difficult circumstances, and building resilience in the face of adversity touched thousands of readers around the world. The terrible accident had taken away Emily's ability to walk, but it had given her something even more powerful and lasting, a clear, strong voice that could inspire others and a platform to make a real, positive difference in the world. And every single morning, when Emily rolled out to our backyard to visit Daisy and the 3 other goats we had added to our little family, I was reminded of an important truth. The best revenge isn't getting even with cruel people like Margaret Whitman. The best revenge is living so well, so fully, and so joyfully that their attempts to diminish you become nothing more than tiny footnotes in your much larger story of triumph, growth, and happiness. Margaret had tried to block my daughter from attending a simple animal auction out of petty spite and cruelty. Instead, she had accidentally given Emily the opportunity to become a leader, an inspiration, and a powerful force for positive change in our community and far beyond. Looking back now, I almost wanted to send Margaret a thank you card. Almost. But watching Emily laugh as Daisy and her friends nuzzled her face with their soft noses, seeing the quiet confidence that now radiated from my daughter as she planned her next blog post about overcoming obstacles, and knowing that our neighborhood had transformed into a place where differences were celebrated rather than hidden or scorned, that was gratitude enough. Margaret Whitman had tried her absolute hardest to break my daughter's beautiful spirit. Instead, she had helped Emily discover just how truly unbreakable, unstoppable, and extraordinary she really was. And that discovery was the greatest gift any father could ever ask for. 2 years later, Emily's foundation had provided therapy animals to over 500 children with disabilities across our state. She had been featured in national magazines, spoken at conferences, and even met with state legislators about improving accessibility laws. The shy, broken girl who had once cried herself to sleep had become a confident young woman who changed lives every single day. Margaret Whitman had intended to teach Emily a lesson about knowing her place in the world. Instead, Emily had learned that her place was wherever she chose to make it, and that no amount of cruelty or prejudice could ever change the fundamental truth of her worth, her strength, and her unlimited potential to make the world a better place for everyone.